Come on, Dan. Let's go. Come on, Dan. Chris is now recording.
Cool.
Well, I'll grab Dan when he's ready.
Oh, don't worry
Take
about
it away, Matt. Do it. Go for it.
Okay. I will click the episode notes on here. Okay, I think we are ready to go. I will just find the right tabs here.
Will you guys give me just a moment? I'm worried that my internet is spotty.
Okay.
Just because I can't load up magiccards.info at the moment for some reason.
Yeah, your sounds comes through very well, but...
Hold on.
There he is.
Hi guys.
We have the whole
Hello there.
family.
Jeez. What are
Nate,
you doing?
Hi, right?
Nate, are you also recording?
My recorder doesn't work. It's stupid.
Nate finds a way to break everything.
It
So
doesn't
Chris is
work.
nice enough to do it for us.
Don't even have it. Chris can record it. It'll be all right. Chris, I have faith in you.
Okay, is Peter or Dan able to do a backup recording?
If I do it, then the sound will be all messed up.
Okay.
Chris, I have faith in you. You can do it. Chris is going to say, F you, Nate. That's what he's going to say. Big, long
That would be the proper response.
Okay. I just hit reboot on my router.
Yeah.
See what that does. Oh, yeah. Quasali Pride Mage. Okay, I'm doing better business now. Thank you.
Okay. Dan, are you ready to go?
Yes.
Okay. Hello and welcome to Pauper the People, episode 143. I'm one of your people. My name is Matti, and with me I have some other people here. Let's introduce the former main host of Pauper the People podcast.
What?
It's Nate.
Hey, it's up. Former. Oh.
Well, we also got Peter here, the one with the punchlines.
Hey.
And then we don't have Chris tonight. Chris is feeling sick and is staying in bed. But we have the Viking from Sweden. It's Dan.
Hey, Matti.
And we have a special guest tonight from So Many Insane Plays podcast. It's Kevin Crow.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Do you want to give a short introduction to our listeners about who you are?
Well, I suppose you would say, as you said, I am one of the two hosts of the So Many Insane Plays podcast, along with Stephen Menendian, and we focus almost exclusively on vintage. But I am primarily a vintage player. I play, my only competitive Magic is vintage. I do play some casual formats. And I've been podcasting for a couple of years now, and I'm generally glad to be here and discuss some theory with you guys.
Sounds amazing. And I think we're ready to go with the news, unless someone wants to introduce themselves again. I could say I haven't been on the podcast since I think Return to Ravnica set review, so some of the new listeners won't remember me, but you can find me on the forums. I run the forums and do some backroom stuff for the People podcast. And the first news item we have today, we're gonna just go through a few news because we want to get to the topic. But Wizards just announced the new From the Vault product, and it's called From the Vault Annihilation. Anyone get a look of this already? What do you think it will be?
It's going to be board wipes. I think we're going to see Damnation. I think we're going to see some Alt Art of Damnation and some Wrath of God and some basically all the fun little board wipe cards that most EDH players love, because EDH is the thing, and that's part of the reason why From the Vault is such a good why they produce them, pretty much.
Yeah. I think it's pretty likely we won't see any commons in this product.
No.
Oh, no.
I do hope that we see Peter's favorite card, though, Jockle Hops, because he likes that card.
Eat a bowl of dicks, Nate.
Kevin, is there a card that you would like to see in the product?
Well, when I first read this title, I thought it sounded awfully spiky, this product, because for a collectible product, most of the time it is, in the past, focused on big creatures or legends or high-profile spells, and to think of a whole set based on removal sounds kind of odd, given this product line.
Yeah.
But as we'll talk about later with regard to Vintage, there are plenty of removal spells that get used in Vintage which would be fine candidates for this set, like Swords to Plowshares, for example. Seems like it would fit the theme in a way.
Yeah,
the big expensive spells, the Jockle Hops, the Damnation, the World Fire, that kind of stuff that sees play in EDH doesn't see play in Vintage. So it's only a cheap, efficient, possibly famous removal spell like Swords, I think, that would fit the bill.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was already printed in from the Vault 20. So.
Yeah, I know. It's been printed a few times, especially in these kind of extra sets. So the odds low on that example, but that's about the only thing that comes to mind is some kind of Disenchant variant that has seen play in Vintage, perhaps. I don't know what their broad definition of Annihilation happens to be.
Yeah, they have a picture already here on one of the cards, I'm guessing, so...
I'm expecting there will be some creatures in here that destroy things, though.
Yeah.
There's no way they'll print a set like this with no creatures in it, right?
Yeah.
Desolation Giant.
Yeah, Desolation Giant. Well, the thing is, it's always been with the From the Vault. Like, you notice these From the Vault started to come out more frequently as EDH became a thing, just because you can get those old cards easier, and they can pimp out and like make more money off of Commander because they haven't made enough money yet. So, I mean, seriously, Commander has really hit the market as a big thing for a lot of Magic players. It's almost their go-to casual event that a lot of people like to play. So,
I would definitely agree that the majority of this product is going to be geared toward Commander.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's what we're going to see. We're just going to see a lot of really good playable Commander cards. I mean, especially I would like to see I personally would like to see Damnation in there just because I need one, and I think they could do some Damnation, some justice by giving it some new artwork.
Yeah,
Agreed.
If they're doing just based it off like Wrath and stuff spells, like the big ones that I think people would want to see would be like Damnation and like Final Judgment, just because those ones are a pain in the butt to track down.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if they're just going to do like different kinds of removal too, you could see some pretty interesting ones. And like you said, if we wanted to see a couple of creatures, Desolation and Giant and Get of the Line, I think are like the biggest candidates for it.
I like Swords though. I'd love to see a Swords to Plowshares. Card's just too awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we shall see. They haven't spoiled any cards yet, but we will see before the product comes out.
Doesn't it make sense that there would be a creature with Annihilator in here too?
Yeah, probably.
What is it? It's just all the Eldrazi. Enjoy.
Yeah, it's just all that.
Is there any Eldrazi that hasn't been reprinted yet?
None of them have. None of the legendary ones.
Ulamog was in From the Vault Legends.
Mm-hmm. My bad, yeah, he wasn't there, but I think he's the only one.
Online, Emrakul has been a promo.
Yeah, well, it's promo on paper, too.
Okay.
I think Kozilek is the only one who didn't
Kozilek's the only one
see a replay.
So that seems the most likely then, if there is one.
Yeah. But then again, you have the Eldrazi one, All is Dust. That's never been reprinted.
Yeah, it's because he's never that big of a thing, mainly because you play Ulamog because it comes into play, blows stuff up, and then he annihilators.
Yeah.
Kozilek is huge, and then makes you draw a card or whatever, and then Emrakul just makes you win the game. So there really hasn't been a reason for the other one or whatever.
Yeah. But All is Dust. That's
the Wrath spell. My bad. I was thinking if that betrays for some reason.
Emrakul makes a bunch of sense, except it's banned in Commander.
Yeah. I think All is Dust would be seen.
I think
it also seems likely, or at least a rumor, that they will be returning to Zendikar and maybe involving the Theros storyline somewhere. In the 3 Eldrazi will probably wait to be reprinted until
Oh
that.
man, Eldrazi Planeswalkers.
Oh God.
Well, they were basically played up to be gods, more or less. So
Because the creatures weren't enough. We need to have Eldrazi Planeswalkers.
3-mana Eldrazi Planeswalkers. Okay, we will see what comes up. And
Yes.
I think we are ready to move to topic 1.
Go for
And
it.
topic 1 today is a little bit about vintage too, because we have a vintage expert here. It's vintage versus pauper, and we are going to talk about the powerful commons. And some of the listeners may think that vintage and pauper are exact opposites as formats, and that they don't share anything. But actually, they have some similarities. Vintage cannot be played on MTGO currently. That will change. Whereas pauper is only sanctioned in MTGO. And building a competitive pauper deck costs about $10 to $100. But vintage decks can be really expensive, and if you measure the price of the format by cost of a single deck, I think vintage is the most expensive format because of the powerful Power 9 cards.
They can cost a house.
But, yeah. But there are some very interesting similarities in the formats, and we are here to talk about the powerful commons that they share. Because huge chunk of the 21 years old of Magic cards, these formats actually share because they're both eternal. And although vintage players are able to use cards from all rarities, there are quite many commons, maybe surprisingly, that see play in the format. And Kevin, I was hoping you could give us a short introduction about vintage, and then we can go and see what commons are there used in vintage.
Well, you were right about everything you said about vintage, and I would simply add that for anyone who's not familiar with the format, it is, despite popular misconceptions, it is actually a healthy, reasonable format to play Magic in. I think that is, for anyone who doesn't know, probably the biggest hurdle to get over. Vintage has real games with real decision making. It has a real metagame. It has evolutions in its metagame. It has real archetypes, combo, control, aggro. And so it has all of the features of every other Magic format you're familiar with, basically. And I think that's one thing that we try to stress on our show, is to uncover the choices that people make in games and in deck construction in Vintage that belie the fact that it is quite healthy. And as you said, commons are no stranger to Vintage. Vintage is not just made up of old, expensive, esoteric cards. In fact, the old, expensive, esoteric cards are pretty minimal in the format, honestly. There are a couple of standout examples, Oath of Druids and Black Lotus and Mana Drain and a couple of others. Bazaar of Baghdad is another big one. Those cards those cards are tent poles of the format, but they do not define every part of it. In between the spaces of those tent poles are powerful commons that get played in both Vintage and Pauper. Your Lightning Bolts and your Spell Pierce and your Delver of Secrets. I mean, these cards are cross formats. So I think people should just appreciate that Vintage is a real, healthy format. It takes from all of Magic's history, which is part of its appeal. And yes, it has some of the most powerful plays in Magic. And some of those define individual games. But on average, the regular games of Vintage are quite healthy. And my friend and co-host Steve Menendian has done a lot of analysis on Vintage over the years. The median number of turns that a Vintage game lasts is not 1. It's not 2. It's not even 3. It's somewhere around 4, plus or minus 1. Now, there's a lot of variance there, but the point is that it's not a turn 1 format either. It's not even a turn 2 format. Although key plays do happen on turns 1 and 2, and games can be virtually decided in those early plays. But the fact is that the format is great, and I love it. And I think that anyone who plays Pauper today, because they're likely playing online, I think you are actually some of the best customers to take on Vintage. Now, if you're the sort of Pauper player who's playing it because it is cheap, well, then maybe not quite so much. But if you're the sort of player who dabbles in other formats like Commander Online or maybe your Standard or other Eternal formats, Vintage will be readily available, in my opinion, when it comes legal online. And so I think I would encourage a lot of your audience to give it a try.
Yeah, actually, what you just said makes sense. Though that actually this is one of the things that Pauper and Vintage share, because I think a lot of the misconceptions that you said apply to Pauper also. People have really polarized opinions about Pauper because they don't know the format. They haven't actually played it. They just see that they play the 2 cents worth commons. It can't be good, but there is a real metagame and real decks.
Very good point. I would imagine, and I don't talk about Pauper in that way much, but I would imagine you have to fight through the conception that Pauper is just people bashing grizzly bears against each other all day.
Yeah. Okay, I had prepared a question for you, but you actually saw it from the show notes. But can you recall what are because Vintage has a restricted list. Can you tell quickly to the listeners what the restricted list is and what commons there are in the restricted list?
Yeah, the restricted list is a conception that is basically unique to Vintage in sanctioned Magic, and it is cards you can only play one copy of. And it was installed many, many years ago, right about the time when tournament Magic was coming into its own, and the Duelist Convocation at the time was establishing rules for different formats. They recognized at that time that certain cards really broke the game of Magic if you could play unbounded numbers of them. Those key among them, the original Power 9, the Moxen, and the Lotus, I mean, these cards are very unbalancing. So they created this list of cards you can only play one of. The list has fluctuated in terms of its size and contents over the years. Wizards is thankfully currently in a mode, as of the last few years, of trimming it down as the format gets more healthy, and the Magic pool of cards can contain more strategies. We've actually seen cards coming off the list. So as of right now, it's mostly older cards, mostly alpha beta era stuff, with a handful of exceptions. There are 3 commons on the list, those being Brainstorm, Lotus Petal, and Ponder. And I don't know, we could talk reams about why those 3 particular cards are all restricted, but the simple truth is that Lotus Petal falls under the heading of fast mana, the Moxen and Lotus. Most of that stuff that produces more mana than it costs is restricted, most of it. And Brainstorm and Ponder are both restricted for approximately the same reason. It's just that they, at the time they were restricted, had contributed to the production of a heavily consistent blue-based combo control deck that was heavily consistent because it had all these cantrips that could search and smooth out draws and find combo pieces, etc.
Yeah, when I look at the list, I just keep wondering Brainstorm and Ponder, but I don't see Preordained there.
Well, that is an interesting topic, and one we could go at length about. The simple truth is that Ponder was restricted amidst several other restrictions. It was a batch restriction of many cards designed to kill a particular deck at the time. That was before Preordained was printed. When Preordained was printed, the format could handle it. It was integrated into viable decks, and it still is today. But it is not contributing to a overly dominant strategy these days. And so there's not been any call to restrict Preordain, but there also hasn't been a movement to unrestrict Ponder on the part of Wizards yet. And this is an area of tension, logical tension, that a lot of players point to and say, it shouldn't be this way. It should be one way or the other, both restricted, both unrestricted. And I'm one of the people that's in the camp of unrestricting Ponder. I don't think it will have the deleterious effects. In fact, I don't think it was absolutely necessary to restrict it at the time. But you can tell that I could go on for ages about this one.
Okay, so Brainstorm, Ponder, and Lotus Petal. Dan and Peter, could you tell us how these cards are implemented in Pauper metagame? Because obviously they have to be really powerful cards.
Lotus Petal has been affected by bannings, so it doesn't see a lot of play anymore in Pauper, mainly because it's just one card and there's nothing to combine it with.
Yeah, it was when Storm was going strong, Lotus Petal was important card of that strategy.
It was even in effect too for the most part. That way you could always guarantee that you had your turn 1 creature if you didn't have Glistener Elf or whatever. So that way you could still sneak down either like Blight Mamba, I think. That's the name of the card. It's been so long since Infect's been online.
It was also used in Affinity long ago, and you sometimes see that again.
It's a rare pick every once in a while, but you do see it pop up every once in a while just because you want to see those people who get like to push for that turn 1 Frogmite or whatever to drop on down.
And Brainstorm almost do not see play in Pauper. It's only played if you can combine it with a shuffle effect or buy some die-hard Delver players that don't want
pretty
the
much
alternatives.
Yeah.
Brainstorm's an interesting example. I find it humorously ironic that you guys went to the shuffle aspect because that just came up in our last episode. The notion that Brainstorm was printed in Ice Age and didn't see play in Vintage for years. It wasn't until the fetch lands were printed and players had ready repeated access to shuffle effects that Brainstorm finally came into its own.
Yeah. The theory behind Brainstorm being such a good card is, hey, I get to pay 1 mana and draw 3 cards. But if you have crap in your hand and crap on top of your library, guess what you're stuck with?
Absolutely. Poop. Also, I would expect that in Pauper that effect is amplified because the power curve of your cards is flatter. Now, don't take this the wrong way. What I mean to say is that in Vintage, there are great spikes in your power curve, or one single card that will change a whole game in your favor right then. If you Brainstorm into Black Lotus, many a game have ended right then.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there aren't power spikes in Pauper, of course, but the simple truth is that the value of seeing 3 cards instantly is amplified in a format like Vintage, where there are such tent poles of power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and contextual power, too.
Yeah, because, I mean, I'd imagine brainstorming into, like, a Black Lotus, a Lotus Petal, and something stupid is just ridiculous. Yawgmoth, yeah, that's ridiculous.
That's right. Brainstorming into Black Lotus and Yawgmoth's Will is one of those things that will end games.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do about it. Just keep playing them over and over again.
You remember that I tried earlier this game? Can you stop it again? No? Cool.
Yeah, so those are some of the examples that the 2 formats share and play, and there are lots of other cards. I'm going to give everyone a chance to talk about a card that they want to talk about. One of my favorite cards that I always want to try to add to my deck is Gush. Now, this is a very important card in Vintage, but doesn't actually see that much play in Pauper. Some of the Delver decks use it and utilize it to keep up the tempo and draw fresh spells, fresh counter spells to protect the Delver. But other than that, it doesn't see much play. Kevin, could you talk shortly about how Gush is implemented in Vintage and why it's such a powerhouse there?
Yeah, Gush is one of those cards that my co-host Steve has literally written a book about it called Understanding Gush, and that should tell you a little bit about how deep it is. But the simple truth is that it is very efficient. You can play it for free, of course. You can abuse then its alternate casting cost in a way that you really probably can't do in Pauper by manipulating the replay of your lands, getting additional replays of lands, especially through Bond, and in general chaining Gushes together. Thanks to aforementioned Yawgmoth's Will, it's possible to play as many as 8 Gushes in a turn. As a matter of fact, I did play Gush 7 times in one turn this past Saturday. in a tournament, in a game of tournament Magic, I played Gush 7 times in one turn. And so it's the fact that it's so efficient, combined with the fact that you can assemble an engine out of it, that is why it sees play in Vintage.
Yeah. It's a very powerful card, and we don't have ways to abuse it in Pauper, like we don't have fast bond engine or anything like that, but it still sees play because it's so efficient at what it does. Drawing 2 cards for free is because Delver doesn't care if you have to bounce islands back to your hand. Yeah. So we can go in order, and everyone can pick up cards they would like to discuss. Dan, did you have any comments in mind you want to talk about here in this topic?
I am very interested in talking about commons or possible commons in Vintage Masters, but I think we're going to wait with that until later.
Yeah, we can talk Vintage Masters after topic 1.
Yes.
To speculate if we have some reprints.
Yes.
Yeah.
So jump ahead.
Peter, do you have any comments in mind you want to talk about?
Are we including the paper ones or no?
Yeah.
Then the obvious one is Hymn to Turok. Any black deck plays Hymn to Turok if you're playing Paper Pauper, just because a turn 2 that can just take the knees out of any deck could be potentially bracketing just like, oh, I robbed you of your second land drop, which keeps you behind. Plus, if you're playing a combo deck at all, it could just go up and flat out kill their combo.
Blow them out.
Yeah, I was just watching an announcement on a Finnish forums about Paper Pauper tournament, and I was wondering if it was full of Hymn to Toroks, but I haven't looked at the results yet. So for the listeners, we can shortly say, and for Kevin, that Hymn to Turok is one of the few cards that are actually printed in common, but they are not printed in common in Magic the Gathering Online. And therefore, it's not legal to use Hymn to Turok in MTGO Pauper.
So you guys are looking for and possibly hoping that it will be printed at Common and Vintage Masters.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
If you want to see Mono Black Control take over more than it's already been,
it would probably cause something to be banned.
Hymn to Turok is downright dirty just because
the two random factors is the thing.
Yeah, you played 2 of those in a row, and I can guarantee your opponent will scoop. They're not going to stick around because it's just too oppressive. It's ridiculous. I mean, you're not leaving your opponent with anything.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but with what little I know about the current Pauper metagame, it seems like decks are not good at digging out from that kind of a hole.
No. If you can put someone that far behind, you've almost claimed a game right there.
Because there's no tent poles, to use my analogy before, that will buy you back all that card advantage.
No, you just lost out and you're hosed. At the dugout, the store I used to work at as a coordinator, we actually did Paper Pauper with the Hymn to Turok. And I won many a games off of Hymn to Turok and my opponent on twice by turn 3. It was first turn Swamp and Duress. Second turn Hymn to Turok. Third turn Hymn to Turok. Scoop next game. There's nothing you can. There's no rebound from that. It's just good luck next time.
How much play does it see in Vintage?
Hymn to Turok has not seen active Vintage play for quite a while. It was part of a few different, mostly mono-black strategies, probably 10 years ago. I might be getting the year wrong, but yeah, it hasn't been quite a long time since Hymn to Turok was played. There are actually some mono-black strategies still, but they have moved beyond Hymn to Turok and focused on some other things since then.
So it's too slow, pretty much.
Yeah, it's too slow, and also, again, what I pointed out is Vintage has so many cards and strategies that can buy back card advantage and or tempo in great swaths that just getting a 2-for-1 is good, but it is not a primary strategy.
Exactly. Yeah. When you're making mention of like black decks utilizing Yaga's Will, sure enough, you hit him with a Hymn to Turok. If you don't hit the lands or anything, you've basically just had him go, okay, so I get to use my alternate hand, aka my graveyard, so I can just keep it there for when I do get my Yaga's Will to play it from there.
You're right about that. Hand disruption is very seldom used in Vintage today, very sparingly. Mm-hmm. And when it is, it's used very tactically along the lines of duress or Thoughtseize, not as just a card advantage strategy like him basically is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else? Sorry.
Hey, do you have any cards?
Oh, sorry. Okay. I actually, and this is a pet card of mine, I like Naya. Wild in the Coddle is one of my favorite cards to play, and I am very excited, just not trying to change the subject or anything, but Modern brought back Wild in the Coddle, so I'm probably going to make Naya for
You want to play Naya Zoo again?
I love Naya's. I thought Naya Zoo was a good deck, and Wild in the Coddle, I love that card. And I wish there was some way of playing that competitively in Pauper, but 3-color decks just don't stand up that well in Pauper.
And that comes down to the discussion we've had time and time again, is that the mana base doesn't afford us.
Mana base can't afford to use it, but that is something that I really, really like. Love that
The day
card.
Pauper gets a dual land that doesn't come into play tapped.
So,
people
but
are
no.
minds.
Is Wild Nacatl even in the metagame at all? Vintage-wise?
I can't remember the last time I saw Zoo in Vintage.
The short answer is no. There are very, very few creatures at the top tiers of Vintage that see play just for their power and toughness.
Oh.
Very few. There are a couple, like Delver of Secrets, which obviously sees play in Pauper as well. But otherwise, most creatures in Vintage are there for additional effects, additional utility, etc.
Yeah, no, it's one of my favorite cards. I love like swinging in turn 2 with that and rancoring the crap out of it. And
I will say though, I have to give props for Vintage. Slash Panther, I think is amazing in Vintage from what I've seen.
It kind of fell out of favor, but when it was big, it was very cool. And Steve and I did a whole episode dedicated to, they called it Cat Stacks or Cat Stacks Fever, depending on how you on whom you ask, because it was primarily a workshop-based aggro prison deck, but the Slash Panther was really kind of a flash in the pan in Vintage, but for a while it was amazing at what it did.
Yeah, because wasn't the general plan for the Cat Stack deck was like turn 1 or 2 you have Slash Panther and stacks online. Eventually, since you just have this aggressive 4-power thing swinging at you consistently, it's not only are you dealing with the constant sacking of stacks that's keeping you behind, but you've got 5 turns, otherwise you're just gone.
That's right. That's right, and it was so easy to cast, and also it preyed on Jace the Mind Sculptor, and in a way that people weren't used to. Haste creatures, aside from what Dredge provides, haste creatures are generally not a thing in Vintage. It just so happens that no creature that's good at utility is also having haste and swinging in. So that was something of a catching the metagame unaware situation.
Okay, you already said took out Jace the Mind Sculptor. I'm completely on board with Slash Panther. Anything that kills Jace the Mind Sculptor is a winner in my book.
Well, it's like, hey, here comes Jace. I do my brainstorm. That's cute. Slash Panther. Jace is dead. Next.
Jace the Mind Sculptor has single-handedly influenced what creatures get played in Vintage.
I hate that card. I hate Jace so much.
That actually
like it did in any format where it was useful.
Jace the Mind Sculptor and that notion of killing Jace the Mind Sculptor actually segues into a next card I want to talk about, which is Lightning Bolt. Many people consider Lightning Bolt as if you play red in Pauper, there is actually no reason to not to play Lightning Bolt. Is that the case in
red
Vintage?
card, basically?
Yeah. Is that same? Is the same notion true for Vintage?
Well, the short answer is no, but the long answer is that there are certain archetypes in Vintage these days that play red, and Lightning Bolt is on a very short list of cards that are causing them to play red. And ironically, several of those cards are commons. But the simple truth is that Lightning Bolt is very popular these days, very common, and there are tons of reasons why that is. We in Vintage use Lightning Bolt in almost every way you can. You use it for spot removal on creatures. You use it for spot removal on Jace. You use it for threatening your opponent's life total. You use it for doubling up with Snapcaster Mage. You use it for flipping Delver of Secrets. It is used to almost its maximal utility in Vintage. It's awesome.
It's the best possible mana cost for 3 damage.
You're right, and it's almost crazy to think that in Vintage people are adding red to their deck for just that card. In certain main deck configurations, it will be the only red card in their main deck.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
It's also sorry, I just wanted to add, it's also a confluence of what gets played in Vintage because Jace the Mind Sculptor has 3 loyalty and because Lodestone Golem has 3 toughness. Those 2 3s contribute greatly to Lightning Bolt's power and popularity.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Yeah, when I was preparing this episode and I was looking up commons that see play in Vintage and in Pauper, the list is long about the cards, but one thing that catches my eye is the amount of counter spells. It seems like Wizards previously, not anymore, but previously printed aggressively good counter spells as commons. We have Daze, Counterspell, Spell Pierce, Red Elemental Blast, Blue Elemental Blast, awesome counter spells that we use. Dan, what are your thoughts? Why certain counter spells are used in Pauper, and which of these counter spells are the most effective in Pauper?
Well, Daze is the most expensive card in Pauper. That's probably because of its use in Legacy. If you look at the modern era counter spells, they are now printing them at the rare.
Yeah,
they're really good.
They don't print powerful counter spells in new sets.
Compared to the rest of the format, the powerful counter spells like Counterflux, that goes in the rare slot.
Yeah, there's no common counter spells that are really good in newer stuff.
No, like we were talking about earlier, like we said, like the only hard counter they've printed in a long while was Cancel, and that's cost 3, which is just too late to use half the time.
Yep, it's one mana too slow.
Yeah, but that was a decision they made quite a while back.
Yeah, it's
looking at the counter spells in Pauper. Then Daze is the most flashy one. Absolutely, Daze is the one you worry about all the time. But the one seeing most play is, of course, Counterspell itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that all red and blue decks should pack at least a couple of Pyroblast or Hydroblasts. And I almost always go for the full set in the sideboards.
Yeah. I think if you're looking for any downside to Counterspell, it's just the double blue. But on single-handedly, just it's countered and that's it. There's no other condition. It's just done.
Yeah, a lot of two-color decks in Pauper actually don't play Counterspell or play less than 4.
Yeah, because the double blue is the double blue actually makes the card significantly worse because you have to have 2 blue mana.
What
about Mana Leak?
Yeah.
It doesn't see a lot of play.
They're good early.
Yeah, Prohibit usually is a better choice for a single blue mana.
Yeah, they're good early but not late, because by the time, if you getting them late, your opponent can pay 3 mana to stop it.
Makes sense. I am not familiar with what the late game of Pauper games is like these days. So
if you're gonna play anything, close to that card, you'll see people playing Miscalculation, because Miscalculations are great early, but if you get stuck with them late, you at least get to cycle them and draw a card.
Makes sense.
Compared to being stuck with a card that I can't do anything with now.
Yeah, that's also interesting, the notion of why Mana Leak isn't actually very playable in Pauper is one of the similar cards that is really powerful is Spell Pierce. It's widely adopted in Legacy. I think it sees play in Vintage, but it doesn't see any play in Pauper. Dan, why is that? Why is Spell Pierce not playable in Pauper?
I can't even remember what Spell Pierce does. Is it extra mana for an instant or sorcery? Or
no. Yeah, 1 mana counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 2.
It's sideboard deck.
I'd like to answer that question by talking about another counterspell that will never ever see any play in Vintage, which is now the most expensive one in Pauper, and that's Exclude. So I think Exclude pretty much illustrates why Spell Pierce is bad in Pauper. Exclude sees a lot of play right now because after the bannings you have to base your Pauper decks on creatures and you have to counter the Muldrifters. You get to draw a card.
Cantrip counter is really powerful.
Yeah, so this is a format
cantrip
where it's
hard counter.
Yeah.
That's Spell Pierce.
Yeah, Kevin, does Spell Pierce see play in Vintage also? I know it's a huge in Legacy.
Oh yes, it's quite popular in Vintage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Counter spells in Vintage are a fascinating topic, which again I could go on for ages about. But a lot of the reasons and that something sees play in Vintage has to do with flexibility. You guys mentioned exclude, for example, which makes sense because you will have targets, so against basically every archetype. Games go long enough such that you can expect to get the 3 mana and get the value out of it. Those kind of expectations don't exist on the same axes in Vintage. You can expect that you will have targets for Spell Pierce only in certain matchups. There is no counterspell basically in Vintage that you will be able to apply to every matchup. Even something omnipresent like Force of Will is not actually good in certain matchups, like Dredge, for example. So Vintage has much more pressure on your card selection and, in addition to that, mana efficiency and flexibility when it comes to counterspell slots. So there's a lot of variety about what counterspells see play in Vintage. They're almost all universally really cheap and really flexible.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's another thing I've noted in Vintage. I mean, I played Vintage a long time ago. Long time ago. Dredge is actually a monster, and wasting if you're countering a Dredge spell, you just wasted a card. You really just wasted it.
There are a couple of situations where you want to counter Dredge's spells. Mostly it's post sideboard and it's protecting something that you brought in to defeat them. And the best counter spell against Dredge is typically Mental Misstep. Yeah, because one of their primary axes for fighting you is Cabal Therapy. So
yeah, it's just that card. Yeah, Dredge is just a monster of a deck, and still one of my favorites.
It definitely is. It's pretty oppressive when it comes to deck construction in Vintage.
Yeah,
at least for sideboards.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's just. I think last time I played Dredge was for casual fun, just for funsies. I had a casual Dredge deck, and I was playing against a control deck, and this kid was just countering everything, and I'm just like, okay, I'll bring it back next turn. So, but yeah, I love that.
So, Kevin, do you have any specific cards that you want to talk about? I see you prepared us a nice spreadsheet about commons that are played in Vintage.
In light of what I've just learned about the current Pauper metagame, I want to highlight Steel Sabotage. Now, we've already touched on it a little bit. I like talking about Steel Sabotage because it represents so much of what I just said about counterspells in Vintage. Also, it represents a lot about the Vintage metagame because Steel Sabotage is played because artifacts are omnipresent in the format, both in the form of archetypes, workshop, prison, and aggressive prison archetypes, but also in the combo control decks. The mostly blue-based Jace control decks will frequently end their games with artifacts, those being Blightsteel Colossus or Time Vault. And the fact that there's that intersection at artifact across so many archetypes means that Steel Sabotage is played heavily in Vintage, sometimes in the main deck, sometimes in the sideboard, and it's played because of its versatility. And I think that is a little bit of an antithesis to how it's played in Pauper, because you guys basically play it because of one archetype and it serves basically that role. In Vintage, Steel Sabotage is actually much more flexible. You can counter cards in combo, control, and aggressive and prison decks using a Steel Sabotage. It has targets against almost every archetype. And it will get you out of situations like a Resolve Tinker for Blightsteel Colossus or a turn 1 Lodestone Golem when you were on the draw. So Steel Sabotage is key due to its efficiency at getting you out of certain situations like that too. That's why it's played in Vintage, and I suspect that the use of it is slightly different in Pauper.
Now it would be interesting to have Chris Weaver on, because people, if you look at MTGO.com and Pauper Premier Event, results. Chris Weaver just won a premier event yesterday. He was playing Delver like he usually does, and he has 2 Steel Sabotage in his sideboard. Peter, Nate, Dan, why does people play sideboard in Steel Sabotage in sideboard in Pauper?
Steel Sabotage, what it does is it stunts the one of the big Pauper decks that if you're not playing Delver you have to deal with is Affinity. And a well-placed Steel Sabotage can bounce one of their creatures back if you miss the counter spell, as well as stop the creature from hitting, or as well as stop it from entering play. But besides that, if you're playing with Serrated Arrows, if you have Serrated Arrows in your deck, you can actually recharge Serrated Arrows and bring it back to your hand before you use the last counter, and play Serrated Arrows again and use just replayability of Serrated Arrows.
And also one aspect that Steel Sabotage does is against Affinity you can bounce the lands.
Yes,
which can be a very efficient way to deny some mana in the beginning, and also deny the Affinity developing.
I think what the Delver does, Affinity is a bad matchup for Delver.
Oh yeah.
And the problem is resolve 4/4s, which Delver has a hard time dealing with. So the Curse of Chains and the Steel Sabotage are mainly to prevent 4/4s from landing, either by countering very early artifacts or just returning Mere Enforcers.
Yeah, I mean it's basically Steel Sabotage is a toolbox in and of itself. I mean it does a lot. And
if you follow Chris' deck list, he has tested every card in Pauper against Affinity.
Pretty much.
He is a Delver player. Like I like playing Delver, but I mean Chris, he does everything with this deck. I mean he is well known for using this deck to win. So
on occasion too, Steel Sabotage, this isn't unheard of every once in a while. I don't know if Chris does it or not, but several players will sideboard it in against the mirror match too. That way you have an answer for the Spire Golem stallouts.
Yep.
Because that's the one big thing that stops Delver in the mirror matches is who sticks out a Spire Golem can usually hold on the fort because no one can attack through them unless you either have your Bone Splitter out or not. But if you can't beat that, then if it's just Spire Golem steering each other down, you go, okay, Bounce Duress, I can start getting through, in which case, A, you finally get to reapply pressure, and it threatens to get their Spire Golem recountered, or they're going to need to start throwing fairies in front of a Golem, which is going to hinder your Spell Stutter sprites and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I brought Steel Sabotage up, because I love hearing the way I described it and the way you described it speaks to the same contribution to a metagame as a whole. They're answering totally different threats across these two different formats, but the fact that they basically represent the metagame, they encompass the metagame in a way, and their own part of it is awesome. I love that.
Yeah, it's used in a lot of stuff. It's like I said, it's just a big toolbox. It can do a lot for one mana for its cost.
Yeah, but it seems like it's more widely adopted in Vintage because of the high density of artifacts, which makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Look at the second place in that premier event.
And that's another Delver deck.
Yeah, Messel is the sort of he's the leader of one of the schools of Delver decks, and Chris and I have been his followers. And he chose Anal instead.
Yeah.
Oh, he plays Mutagenic Growth.
Yeah.
Yep.
It makes
He's
me
also
sad.
the last diehard Brainstorm player.
Yes, he is.
Delver.
Kevin, does Anal see play in Vintage? It's 1 mana counter Mox.
It does, and it sees play because it counters Oath of Druids.
Yeah.
When Annull saw more play before Steel Sabotage was printed, for the reasons I just described, it was still quite good at countering artifacts. And Oath of Druids has always been around in Vintage for ages, basically, since it was printed, but it comes and goes in terms of relevance in the metagame, depending on, effectively, how good of a combo you can make with it, and or how good creatures are. When Gristlebrand was printed, Oath jumped into the forefront again, because now it's a way for you to oath up drawing 14 cards, which is, as you know, pretty good. So Annul does see play. It doesn't see as much play as Steel Sabotage because it lacks the flexibility, but it does still see some play.
Yeah.
Kevin, did you have some other cards you want to discuss?
Well, before you guys took your turns, I was going to bring up Lightning Bolt. And for all the reasons we covered, and we've already touched on Brainstorm, there's one that I see that I don't see on. Well, hold on a sec. Let me look at the one mono black deck in this tournament result.
No, you are absolutely correct. I see which card you are highlighting in the spreadsheet. This is one of my favorite cards, and I don't get it why it doesn't see more play in Pauper. I like to include it in when I brew rogue decks. I always, if I play black, I will include this card in the sideboard at least. But Kevin, please.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I was hoping to see it on this list, but I'm talking about Snuff Out. Snuff Out is a fascinating card in Vintage. It is on the expensive side, both in mana and or in life, so it's not omnipresent. It is about as far you can get, I would say, from an alternate mana cost that people are willing to commit to in Vintage, because for many reasons, which would take me ages to explain, having a swamp in play is not as good a thing as you might think. It is simple to accomplish, and it is frequently a bad choice, mostly because of wasteland. But that having been said, Snuff Out does see play. It's in sideboards usually, and it's mostly good because it hits Lodestone Golem on the draw with only one land, which is a very, very narrow window of effects. If you look through all of Magic's 10,000 plus cards, you will find very few ways to remove a Lodestone Golem with only a single mana on the draw. And also, it's just getting a little bit better because creatures are sort of on an upswing in Vintage. There's been a lot of interesting printings lately, as well as metagame developments that mean creatures are more and more common these days. I'm a little bit surprised that it doesn't see play in Pauper. It seems like such an amazing tempo play.
It used to. A lot of the big problem is one of Black's worst matches for the while there was the classic Hexproof Auras deck, just because with so much direct removal, they stick any creature, and Black can't do a thing to stop it.
Yeah, can't interact with Hexproof. It's just, you just can't interact with it at all. You have to sub out like stuff that hits everything and not targets.
Yeah,
so you end up having
guess verdict.
Exactly. So you have edicts in the sideboards, edicts in the main board, and everything. And the other thing too is Black has been kind of morphing towards more of a what's it called, devotion deck now too, as you can kind of see with the Grey Merchant of Asphodel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So everything wants to have like a double black mana cost in its cart for the most part, and then finding ways of redoing it. So basically, it's just throw out a bunch of stuff, get as much black on the board, eventually just start playing cards that just net you so much life that it puts you back up.
Yeah.
But I'm still interested because against Delver, for example, you cast Gets Verdict and they counter it. Maybe you don't have more mana to cast any more spells, but you could cast Snuff Out for free, and maybe the Delver player now doesn't have enough mana to counter the Snuff Out, because it's very crucial against Delver to get rid of the first Delver.
Oh yeah, and I completely agree with you, Matti. It's a great card, but like I said, like the only reason why, like, it used to see play in sideboards all the time, but it seems like that's the reason why you've seen it kind of just phase away.
Yeah,
is because people have been going more towards the the devotion method of play as opposed to what it used to do.
Yeah, and we're not considering the fact that say it's you're on that turn one, and who's to say that they didn't lay that swamp and tapped it? Because if they laid that swamp and tapped it to do something else, banking on I got a Snuff Out in my hand and I'll stop this Delver, that's fine, because if you can still daze out a Snuff Out because they can't tap the mana to answer it.
Good point.
It really doesn't matter.
It was very popular during Infect, before Infect was banned.
Oh yeah, because you needed to kill, if they played a turn 1 creature, it needed to die because you were almost guaranteed death turn 2 if you didn't stop it.
Sure.
Yeah.
But speaking as a black control player, then today there's a much stronger zero mana alternative for the black decks in Pauper. if you want to use it on Delver, Snuff Out is bad because For Life is so much.
Yeah.
So Spinning Darkness is way stronger.
Yeah.
And gaining 3 life instead of losing 4 is
pretty solid.
Yeah.
Well, I
and
appreciate the
Spinning Darkness
explanation.
even
That makes
doesn't
sense.
see a lot of play today.
Yeah.
No, yeah, like the Black's main life games today now seem like banking on gray merchants, and then if they're really, really going to that method, like you see with this guy where he's playing the 3 corrupts as well, because people used to shy away from that too, just because they ran the 8 cycle lands instead, so corrupt just wouldn't hit nearly as hard as it needed to.
Yeah.
And that's why they're losing against Delvers, because if you run the sneak attack deck before Grey Merchant and you use Spinning Darkness, then you have a pretty good Delver matchup.
Well, you also got to look at when we're comparing, because like being that we don't have Pauper dailies anymore, you see mono black flourishing in the 8-mans more than the premiers anyway. Like your premier events, the mono black deck doesn't usually top 8 all that much in premier compared to.
But it used to do that in the old.
Yeah, it used to. Yeah.
And the reason is that they build it so it can't be Delver now because it's so popular to be Devotion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Devotion.
It seems like an odd play. It works, but yeah, it doesn't seem like it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Remember, right after the bannings, then Mono Black Control was good
deck to play.
It beat Delver.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting conversation about Snuff Out, and I'm looking forward to seeing more Snuff Outs in Pauper metagame. I think the power level is so high that it's gotta be played at some point again, I think.
It's just going to take
in the matchups where Mono Black Control is really good, Snuff Out makes you lose. Because losing 4 life is too dangerous.
Yeah. I think Snuff Out is something that you might want to play, but as soon as you played when you're going into that second match, when you're going against Delver, I think it's something you want to pull out and put something else in.
You can't really play Snuff Out against Stompy either.
No.
So which aggro decks do you want it against? Will you use it against Goblins? No.
No, because they have so many sack outlets, and you can't risk losing that much life against Goblins, because Goblins will take you turn 3, even if you don't give them a head start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So losing 4 life is too expensive in Pauper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting and all good stuff. I had one more card that I wanted to briefly touch, which is Dark Ritual. One of the very iconic cards. It's from the same cycle of cards as Lightning Bolt and Ancestral Recall. 1 mana, you get 3 something, and this is a black card, and you get 3 black mana to your mana pool. Now, this card has not been played in Pauper after the bannings that took away Storm. I think it's one of the important spells in Vintage, though.
It is, and more narrowly now than it used to be. Obviously, it is primarily played in combo decks, and it is still played today. Burning Tendrils combo is forefront of the metagame right now, and Dark Ritual is key to that strategy. But I think that time has shown that Dark Ritual is not as formative or impactful on what forms the Vintage metagame as other cards that were printed in the same era. If you had asked some popular Vintage players maybe 10 years ago what the pillars of the format would be, they might have listed Dark Ritual next to, say, Mana Drain and Mishra's Workshop. Less so today. Even though it's heavily played, it's not viewed as the driving force behind whole archetypes that it once was. It's still important and still necessary for executing combos in specific ways, but that's much less forefront in the format from a PR standpoint.
Okay, I think we covered topic 1. We had an interesting discussion about all these different powerful commons that can be used in both formats, Vintage and Pauper. If I want to conclude this discussion, what I see is that we use same cards, but actually the reasons why specific card choices are made can be really different because card choices are, of course, always dependent on the strategies and decks you play again, and the strategies in Vintage are although like we can put them in categories like aggro, control, and combo, but they use so different cards, and you have to interact with different cards, and therefore you need to have different answers for them. Most of the Pauper or commons that you see in both formats are actually removal spells and counter spells. So stuff to answer the other players' threats.
I would agree completely, and I would also add that Vintage has one access that Pauper doesn't have the same pressure on, and that's mana cost. All the reasons for choosing cards that you just described are the same across formats. You're responding to the metagame. Vintage has an additional pressure, a great pressure on mana cost. So some of the cards that would fit the definition of metagame removal, like, say, Geth's Verdict, for example, can't see play in Vintage because they're not mana efficient enough. So that kind of puts a trunk on the mana cost, and you'll look, if you analyze the commons in Vintage there, the average mana cost is about 1 mana across the board. And that's a big pressure that doesn't... It's still a pressure in Pauper, but it's not as powerful on the results as it is in Vintage.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, people, for steering the discussion in this part. And if it's okay to everyone, we can go to the finance section.
Right.
Dan, do you have something for us about Vintage Masters coming Magic the Gathering online this next summer?
Yes. The prices of some commons on Magic Online is very high because they were not printed really in a real set on Magic Online, such as Days and Gush. Mercadian Masks was also the worst draft format ever, etc. So when a card is printed in Vintage Masters, which if they do the same thing they did with Modern Masters, they create this fantastic draft format. Everybody wants to play Vintage. The common cards that are printed in Vintage Masters will be priced at about the same level as Spellstutter Sprite, which was printed in Modern Masters then. So some cards that are very expensive in Pauper will drop to a 10-cent level probably. Yeah. Which brings me to my question then, Kevin. What commons do you see absolutely necessary to reprint in Vintage Masters?
Wow. Gush is actually really high on that list. I mean, for all the reasons we just stated, Gush is very popular in the metagame right now. And as you have already observed, mostly removal. Lots of your Lightning Bolt, possibly Snuff Out, but more likely Ancient Grudge, and let's see, Nature's Claim.
I think they won't reprint anything that's modern legal in Vintage Masters.
I think Lotus Petal could see it.
Lotus Petal could.
I could see Lotus Petal reprints.
You don't think they will print anything that's vintage or that's modern legal?
No, I don't.
That strikes me as pretty restrictive. The idea of Vintage is not that you play cards up to an era, but that you play cards all the way back to an era.
Yes, but those cards are widely available on Magic Online. I think they want to close the holes. That is the cards that don't exist on Magic Online at all.
Yeah.
And to provide these cards that are hard to get on Magic Online.
I am not an expert. How long is that list of holes?
It's 400 cards, I think, somewhere along that line.
Wow. Yeah. More than I thought. Well, okay. Well,
but most of them are worthless cards that you don't want to see.
Granted. I would completely agree that they will take this opportunity to fill those holes. I don't know what the overlap is between those holes and Vintage playability, but you guys are keenly aware of some key cards, and so I would be very surprised if they didn't fill the holes that you were all mentioning.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious whether or not they're actually going to downgrade some cards. Like, online, cards like Red Elemental Blast and Blue Elemental Blast, they're considered, they don't have those on, though they're not common level online. I'd be surprised to see if they actually downgrade that to common, because we all know it's common in paper.
That makes a lot of sense. Hopefully someone at Wizards listens to your show or listens to the community and knows these issues are still issues. It's pretty clear to me that one of the things Vintage Masters represents is the alignment of paper Magic and digital Magic. And so not just what cards are even available, but other issues like the ones you just described about commonality being different. I imagine those things are on their mind collectively.
Because, I mean, Modern Masters...
I think all the commonality shifts in Modern Masters was because of the draft format.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure.
The commonality is only... all the decisions made on that is made because of the draft format.
Because, I mean, you look at Modern Masters, they downgraded and upgraded certain cards.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So...
if you had asked me before Modern Masters was released if they could make a format like that be so awesome and limited, I would have said no way. And so now I can't even imagine how they could make Vintage Masters that cool also. But the simple truth is this is possible.
Yeah.
Whoever designed Modern Masters is good at what they do, and I don't see why they couldn't do it again, especially with the history of Magic opened up all the way to the beginning to them. There's got to be some fun things they can do.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, though, is that specific to the commons that get played in Vintage don't overlap very well with good limited Magic. It's hyper efficient removal and or really niche removal, like say Ingot Chewer. Ingot Chewer is an okay limited card, but I mean, come on, it's not very exciting. No. It's not going to make a good limited format in and of itself. And something like a Gitaxian Probe or a Nature's Claim or a Cabal Ritual, these cards aren't going to make a good limited format. So the cards that are common and good in Vintage, I have a feeling that list won't be very long for those that people like about the limited format. But there will almost certainly be a few dozen of them.
Yeah.
Short poll. How many of us is going to invest in Vintage when it's available in Magic the Gathering Online? Kevin, Dan, Peter, Nate? I know I will. I already bought duels, fetches, many of the formats tables, and now I'm just waiting Vintage Masters to drop Magic the Gathering Online.
I would be very hesitant to own any dual lands right now on Magic Online because I think they will be rares in Vintage Masters.
Yeah, but I need them to play Legacy, so...
yeah, but you're going to lose a lot of money on them.
Yeah, I'm strongly considering
I'm not worried about that.
Okay.
I'm strongly considering it just for the online because it's going to be available, because I'm probably going to draft the crap out of Vintage Masters. And I am very, very strongly considering because I'm a casual player now, but back when I first started playing Magic before Kamakrappa came out, for those that might not realize what I just said, that's Kamigawa. It's a set that I don't acknowledge as a real set. It's what made me quit Magic, but I used to be a competitive player back in the day with Type 1, and I do miss it. I just don't like playing competitively, but with Vintage Masters coming and it probably being really easy to get a lot of good vintage cards, I'm very strongly considering getting involved at least to the vintage on the online end. So,
as the resident vintage quote-unquote expert here, I find it highly ironic that I'm one of the people saying they're not going to get into it. I'm not a Magic Online player, and I already own all the cards that I need to play sanctioned vintage in print. Yeah. I do lament the fact that it's difficult for me to play vintage at a moment's notice in person, but the simple truth is I get to play enough for my choices, my lifestyle. I am actually really pleased, though, to hear all of you, especially on the Pauper podcast, which is, there's some level of irony there, talking about getting into vintage, primarily because it's coming to Magic Online. You guys are, for lack of a better term, the target audience for this thing.
Yeah.
And I said on our last show that if Magic Online's version of Vintage, and especially with the launch of Vintage Masters, if that's a wild success, it's going to dramatically influence Wizards' position on Vintage, their support for it, etc., both from a development standpoint and possibly from a product standpoint. I really want the thing to succeed. I want everyone who plays Magic Online today to get excited about not only Vintage Masters, but then trying the format now that it's more available to them.
I think the strong thing for Wizards is being able to have an online source. It's a lot easier to market it online because, like, being that the stuff that's in paper is really actually, like, you compare markets compared paper versus online, they just can't do that in paper without one ticking off a very large percentage of vintage players, and two, you destroy the secondhand market for card shops if you go on a big reprinting spree and reprint things like Moxes and Lotuses and all that stuff. So the reprinting online is the next logical step because it's a completely different market that doesn't affect the paper market.
And it doesn't break the reserve list promise.
Yeah, and it does not break the reserve list. I mean, it just makes common sense for them to do that.
You're completely right about the common sense aspect of it. I would take issue with the perceived impact of reprints in the long run, but that's, again, another topic for another day.
Yeah. All I know, if they ever would, I would not want to be in the complaint department of WotC if they ever did that.
Oh, no. Did you see or does anyone here remember the backlash of what happened when they said they were reprinting Soul Ring?
Oh, God.
I remember the backlash that happened when they printed Chronicles.
Oh, God. Oh, yeah. That's even bad.
Yeah.
What do you mean you're reprinting these awesome cards?
I had the list 24 hours before my local game store. So I sent my friend with all the cards, and he was like, I'm going on vacation. I got to sell exactly these cards. It's all my Mishra's Factories, all my Urn Engines.
Yeah.
And he sold it.
Well, I think that the Chronicles situation is obviously a debacle. There's just no other word to describe that. But the people who are in charge in Wizards right now are keenly aware of all the issues with regard to the reserved list, which is part of the reason why it's still in place. But it's also, I believe, part of the reason why they will constantly and continually reevaluate it. And I firmly believe that if it is ever adjusted again or possibly decommissioned, that Vintage Masters is one of the key early steps down that road.
Yeah. It would be, if they ever did that in paper, it'd be extremely limited because, I mean, the potential of reprinting a lot of those, coming from, I used to work at the Dugout, so I dealt a lot with secondhand market and paper. You reprint too much of those, and you could pretty much destroy a shop that's getting profit off of secondhand market and paper Magic sales.
Definitely. And
you pretty much destroy their business, like to the point they could go out of business. That would ever happen.
Any way that they did that would have to be very careful about exactly what you said. But I think they could accomplish it. I genuinely believe that it's possible to accomplish it in such a way as to not destroy the small business, as you said.
Yeah.
The best way is, or how they've made mention of it, basically is what they've been trying to do, it seems like. Bits and pieces at a time, if any.
Yeah. You know, there's one interesting, and I don't want to get on a high horse here, but there is one aspect about Magic printings that has been pretty constant for the last decade or more, and that is the time frame of their spoiling. Imagine, just think about this, and we don't have to go further, but think about if they told you today that they were going to reprint the Power 9 in 2 years. Think about what that does to the mathematics and the economics of the equation that you just mentioned about that card shop's health. Yeah. Imagine if that card shop knows 2 years in advance that that's going to happen. Now, I don't mean to ask you all to explain the outcome. I'm just simply saying that I think that changes the dynamics of reprinting a lot, is the amount of notice that we get in today's modern era.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, it's like there's certain shops that would probably be looking to sell all that stuff as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. And I think there would be another but perhaps opposing backlash for people who suddenly became interested in it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It'd be an interesting thing, and I think that's just one of a handful of ways that they could mitigate the effects.
I think the one thing you'd see if they ever did do that and gave advance notice that they were doing it, you'd see a lot of power tournaments popping up all over the place. Because
that's a good thing by me.
Because the only way, I used to be a coordinator at the Dugout. The only way to get rid of high-end stuff like that, you're going to come across that one player that drops just tons of money on Magic. But in most cases, when you get a product that is worth a lot, one of the easiest ways to make money off of it is to do a tournament.
Definitely. Yeah, power tournaments are one of the staples of the vintage community.
Yeah, I mean that's some of the high end product. That's the only way to get rid of that high end product is to just do a tournament on it. Because when they did those the Commander's Arsenal, they gave each store like 10 of them. That's it. Mm-hmm. Each store got 10 Commander's Arsenals. We at the dugout we parceled all 10 of those out in tournaments because if we could have sold them outright, but you're not making much.
And it brings players into your store. And
it brings players into the store. I mean, you have potential. Yeah, you have a lot more benefits by making that a big tournament prize. So we had a lot of mad players that were like, well, I want to buy it. It's like, we only got 10. We sell it to you. We tick off X amount of other customers that walk through the door because they have to win theirs and you just bought yours. And
that dovetails with part of my point about the the beginning of the excitement for Vintage Masters.
Yeah.
Imagine how much excitement would be drawn if that product was printed.
Oh, exactly. It would sell out.
Well, that was interesting discussion. Dan, do you have something to add to the people who are interested about MTGO Finance specifically before we go to our next topic?
The short answer to that is it's time to sell Return to Ravnica block. Standard PTQ season ends on the 9th of March, and it is way earlier than earlier years. So rotation is becoming a factor already now. The price of Return to Ravnica cards will drop. Some cards will drop 98% because of rotation. So get out while you can get out. And
what card is going to drop 98%?
Rotation is the most powerful financial factor on Magic Online. So it will affect everything, including the mythics, including the shocklands, everything.
What's an example of a card that's going to drop 98%?
Everything. Pack Rat will be a 5-cent card on Magic Online in November. Desecration Demon will be a 5-cent card, maybe 10 in November. Night Whale Spectre, sees no play in Modern, will be 5 cents.
Fascinating.
Yeah, because Kevin,
look at what happened to
finance.
look what happened to the staples of Innistrad block, Stormkirk Noble, Hellrider, all 5-cent cards.
Yeah, because the cards have no value when they are not standard playable in MTGO because there's so many of them in the rotation in the system.
Something like Commander and Casual.
It's such a small factor.
Yeah, and people, for example, in Commander, if you play Commander in paper, you want to have 20 Soul Rings. If you play it on MTGO, you only need one because you can put one to each of your decks.
That's fascinating. I hadn't even considered that.
Is the Navigator still a 5-cent card?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though it's so powerful and omnipresent in Commander.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, the reason why I can see why Deadeye has Deadeye always been at 5 cents?
Yes,
pretty much. It's never been a big thing.
It had a spike actually a couple of weeks back, and it went to 8, but it's going back.
Probably
big spenders right there.
You'll see a lot of people, and like I play a lot of Commander. I've seen a lot of people pulling Deadeye out ever since the Sylvan Primordial banning.
Oh yeah.
They banned the Sylvan Primordial, so a lot of people are like, oh, this card's worthless now.
Sad but true.
Okay, thank you everyone for the financing discussion, and we are already running over an hour. So I want to get into topic 2, but we will make it short. I just want to mention this topic because it has been taught in popular people before, and it's interesting. I read again the 2 articles by Mark Rosewater about the New World Order, and I thought this could be interesting discussion with someone like Dan and Kevin and Nate, who have played like years and years and years and seen how Wizards have developed cards over the years and how they design new sets and new cards. But we will put these articles to the show notes, And I have this notion that I want to say here is that some people were afraid when these new world orders were explained by Mark Rosewater that we will not see any more constructed playable commons, because they wanted to take some of the complexity out of common level. The idea behind the New World Order is that the barrier to entry Magic the Gathering grows all the time, because they print more cards, more sets, more mechanics, and it creates this complexity creep and makes the game more complex, because new players have to know so much if they want to use all the cards that have been printed in 21 years. So there is 3 kinds of complexity that goes here. It's comprehension complexity, which means new players must be able to identify what a card does. For example, what bestow means. That's not clear to someone who doesn't know the rules, who haven't read articles about the mechanic. Then there's board complexity, and it's how cards interact with each others in Battlefield. Especially in Vintage and Legacy and Pauper, you see infinite loops created by some certain cards that were not in the same set. They were printed 20 years apart from each other and were not designed to work together. And then there is the third complexity, which is strategic complexity. Things like tempo, card advantage, who is the beatdown. All these things have made this game so popular, but the barrier to entry is high. And this is why Wizards have shifted their thinking so that they will print less complex card at common rarity, so that when new players open the booster packs, they see at least 11 cards that they can understand.
Yeah.
This is something that was discussed. We don't have time to go deep, but I would like to get everyone's opinion on this topic shortly.
I think that very complexity that a lot of players who have played as long as I have complain about is the very complexity that keeps their game alive. Because if you look at the models that Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon have followed, there's a reason why they've fallen out of popularity. Because the game for those 2 card games has not changed. It's stayed the same for so many years that people eventually get bored. Where you can have Magic and keep adding stuff and dummying down the common level stuff that your newer players are playing. Because let's face it, your newer players are 10 sometimes 7 to 10 year olds that are just starting in the game. They don't when they're starting out like that, you need something that's simple, where I have this creature and my creature's bigger than yours, it dies. That's the type of Magic they are playing. I used to run a youth Magic group, and they aren't playing combo. They're playing my creature's bigger, I'm going to beat you over the head with it. That's how they play. They don't care about, hey, I did this in 4 turns. That's not what they're going for. And I as much as I'm like any other older player complain about, oh, that's dumb, they're dumbing the game down, they have to survive. If they don't, they'll fizzle out like the other 2 games.
And I want to add here quickly, before other people have a chance to talk about this, Mark Rosewater also points out that when they create new sets, they have flagged so that like 20% of the commons can break the red flags that are provided by the New World Order if there is a larger scope that they have to consider. For example, you can, if you have a Theros and you want to highlight mechanic like bestow, you have to include it in the common also.
Yeah.
But Peter, Dan, Kevin, did you guys read the articles? Do you know about them? And do you have any thoughts quickly?
Quick ones, I guess, would be, I can understand what they're doing. Hell, for as long as I've played, there's still some things I don't understand how it would fully resolve, just because of layering and all those other fun little mechanics. So I can see where, yeah, you need to tone it down so people who are coming into the game can understand. Also, the other problem you can realize, like, if you keep trying to add new complex things, eventually you're going to come to a situation where, for lack of a better reference, if anyone's done any kind of coding here, you just create a script error where the game stops because nothing can resolve properly because of how one or two of these mechanics interact with each other. So, them finding a way to rein themselves in so they don't become overly complex and let themselves out of control, while simultaneously keeping the game interesting and more accessible to new people. It's basically what I get from it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to this movement. It is the sort of thing that, as a vintage player, doesn't really apply to me. So I can acknowledge it as probably a good thing in the grand scheme of things toward the health of the game and its development. I also don't really require it for my own personal use. I am the sort of person who digs into the mechanics of a new game or anything new about Magic, possibly to my detriment in some cases. And so I would simply point out that for a format like Vintage, complex commons or complexity in general is not actually something to be prized or sought. A lot of the commons that see play in Vintage all the way through to Pauper are good for their efficiency and in many cases their simplicity. We've talked about Lightning Bolt and Steel Sabotage. These are not complex cards. They're efficient, they're flexible, they fill the right role. So I'm sympathetic about this. I think it's probably been a good thing for the development of the game and its embrace of new customers, or by new customers. But, it didn't affect me a whole lot.
Yeah, but what you said about Steel Sabotage, I disagree a bit, because I don't think it's actually a straightforward, easy card to understand, because it has strategic complexity. But out of the three complexities, the comprehension and board and strategic complexity is something that you can print in new cards, because new players they don't see the strategic complexity before they develop further in their playing skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A good point.
Yeah. Dan, do you have any comments about this subject?
Yes, I've listened a lot to, read what Mark writes and listened to his podcast, and I think he is so good at game design at this point that I pretty much trust anything he does. He's also gotten a lot better at motivating why he does things. And I think anybody who is into designing games should listen to him, because he knows a lot about what works and what doesn't work. So I'm pretty much okay with whatever he does. That's my short reply.
A lot of your really good... I play a lot of tabletop games, and a lot of your good game developers have worked at Wizards anyway.
Yes.
I play Legendary. It's a collectible card. It's a living card game, basically. That was designed by one of the people who designed Ravnica. I mean, the Wizards has good game developers. It's plain and simple, and they just do.
Yes.
So, but I don't know. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. We can go to the Rage of the Week. Did you guys see these poll pictures that I think Chris Weaver added these?
I added them.
Chris encounters a lot of ragers.
Yeah. I found both these. Chris submitted this one.
Okay, take it away, Nate.
Okay. Our first one is one that actually Chris... This one? Yeah, this is one Chris submitted. This is... we're going to give a shout-out to Sherm here. He looks like he lost out against Delver Blue. And looks like... the game result is covered up. It's White Weenie. Basically, Sherm responds to C. Weaver after Chris won. So lucky, let's draw 8 counters. Well, I hate to break it to you, Sherm, but that's what Delbert does. Don't know what to tell you. Yeah, that's all I really put. He's just so lucky. Let's draw 8 counters. Well, he just explained to Chris in a short sentence what Delver's supposed to do. It's supposed to counter stuff. And I'm sorry you're playing White Weenie. That's going to happen.
Yeah, we're going to include these features also to the show notes.
Yeah.
I think it's probably worth pointing out that commented game ended with the triggered ability from Spellstutter Sprite number 3 on the stack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely. Ulcerated Arrows is in play.
Yeah.
against.
And it looks like White Weenie has... Does it only have 2 lands in play?
I think it has a third land over the game or something.
Okay.
So... Then we have another one here by Kara. Who's the rager in this one? Sustain42 is the rager in this one. This kind of blurred out, but he's Sustain42 writes to Karatech24 total sack. And then Karatech responds with, "Are you always angry?" Sustain42 responds with, "Are you always a total sack?"
Karatech, I wouldn't consider myself one. Sustain has left the conversation.
So apparently he just got mad because he drew. I don't know. It's just some of these rages. There's a lot more. I found another one by Grappling Farang who put one on salty losers. And again, I know I've said this multiple times before, but Grappling Farang is really an awesome person to have playing Pauper because he always, most of the time, gives us content for Rage of the Week because he ticks a lot of people off. And for that, I salute him. Congratulations.
And like we said, he's not a bad guy and he's not a jerk. He's a cool guy to talk to.
Yeah, he's really cool.
He just outplays people. It frustrates him to no end.
And I'm just going to end Rage of the Week with saying, Grappling Farang, I know you listen to the show. Thank you and keep up the good work.
Yeah, I just want to say to Kevin and possible new listeners, Rage of the Week is a segment of the show that it's not always there, but quite often, where we look at the screenshots that people flag in Twitter or send at us about MTGO, where people lose their mind when they are losing or having bad draw or something like that. It happens a lot, even in daily events and premier events, which is kind of fun to think about. But I guess it's the anonymous thing that the client has. You don't see these kind of rages when you're playing in Vintage Championships, but I bet you will see these when you are playing Vintage in Magic the Gathering online.
For one thing, you're not going to see it in person because if people did what they do online in person, they'd get disqualified.
Yeah,
it's that simple. They just
good old Banhammer.
Judge would just be like, "Get out of here, you're done."
There's no judge sitting at the table watching for sportsmanship in this kind of situation.
No.
Yeah, but you can report these to the wizards, and I wouldn't advise anyone to be a jerk in Magic the Gathering online because that's not. I would advise that like on any level for any reason, but also because your collection it's owned by wizards.
They can revoke it.
Yeah, they can revoke it.
Wow, that's an interesting aspect.
And they can ban you for... I know people who have been banned for 6 months and stuff like that. They can access their collection in 6 months. It's pretty harsh.
Yeah,
but did they actually get banned for being not nice?
I don't know the reasons. I didn't ask. I just... I happen to know 2 people that... One of them is actually a really good player that... got banned for 5 or 6 months, something like that.
Yeah. And the other thing about online is you can have that one player that gets mad at you once, and they will dog you for a while. I've had that happen in the tournament practice room.
Yeah.
Every time I log on, it's like, oh, you're gonna luck out today, or F you, or it's like, really?
Moral of the story: don't be a bad person.
Yeah, just don't be a bad person.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the Rage of the Weeks, Nate. And
no problem.
We have one more thing before we close the show and give out our contact information. Dan, you have a vintage story for us.
Yes, but before I go into that, I'd like to say to Kevin, thank you for an excellent podcast. I think your podcast is too constructed what limited resources is for limited.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. That's high praise. And
the way you go into strategy and the way you break down things is unparalleled. And I think I would love if there were podcasts like that for other constructed formats.
Well, thanks again.
And Matti forced me to listen to you, and thank you, Matti.
Yeah, for Kevin, just quickly, Dan does YouTube videos which lists top 20 Magic the Gathering podcasts or top 15, and there are like few judges who submit their list, and then Dan combines the points. And so many insane plays have been placing really high there because I have been giving so many points to you.
Yeah, I'm familiar. I saw, well, I don't know when you began doing that, but I saw one a couple of months ago, and I posted on YouTube saying, why don't you listen to our show? And I think that's why we've joined your list, and I appreciate that. And I like what you do there, too. I mean, that adding the different perspectives, you get people who value different things in different shows, and your weighting and your scoring, I think, gives a good perspective. I think it's a good way for people who might be looking for Magic podcasts to find something that would fit their interests. Because I know while you guys might appreciate our show, and I hope that more people do, it's not for everyone. It's a niche format, and it's also a niche style. But I think what you do with that top 10 or top 20 list provides a pretty good value for the community as well.
We started just a year ago in February, and the next episode is in March. We will be bringing a new judge online, so there will be 5 judges, and that will shake up the list.
Cool. Well, I again, I appreciate the high praise. Thank you.
Okay, let's hear a vintage story.
The vintage story, yes. Few people know this, but I've been playing vintage competitively. I did play vintage competitively for 3 years at a national level. I traveled for vintage tournaments, etc. And the reason I got into vintage was that it was the only format available, because this was 1994. So in practice for my 3rd tournament ever, I just got my Lotus, and I was sitting down at a local game store just practicing, and there was this guy with a Merfolk deck who showed up, and he said like, you don't worry if my deck like beats you really fast, because it's really fast and people tend to get upset. And okay, I said, and we rolled the dice, and I Black Lotus Shiny Fireballed him.
That a boy.
So, and then it was time for the tournament. So I sat down with it was basically a green-red monsters deck with Black Lotus Shiny Fireball in it. And my opponent went Volcanic Island. This was the second game. And I went Black Lotus Shiny Fireball. And he went Blue Elemental Blast. So I didn't win that tournament.
Oh.
But I got out of the Power 9 3 years later, then, because I thought that these cards are so expensive. It can't be reasonable to hold on to them. But I should have. I have 1 Mox still. That's all I have.
I love hearing old vintage stories from people that played back in the day. People, whether or not they still do, or whether or not they got out as you did, because either they still love the format, or they got out at some point and then they have a sob story about what their cards were worth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I owned 3 beta Black Lotuses at times.
Jeez. Wow. Fast. That's
but
awesome.
I went through my old cards, and I found, like, in the worthless pile, I found 4 Caracas and 3 Lion's Eye Diamonds.
Did you fully get rid of your collection? Did you fully unload your collection, or did you just get rid of the expensive stuff?
No, I've always been a finance person. I was buying cards in '94 from the US. I was one of the few people with a good internet connection. So I bought cards for Pendelhavens was the best card. 25 cents, sold for about $20 in Sweden.
Nice. Back when I played.
No, so I sold every card individually, which means that I still have a wardrobe pretty much full of Magic cards.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
But it's all junk except for then the Caracas.
No, back when I played Type 1, Stasis was a big deck, and for those that might... Stasis was a type of win con where you really just wanted your opponent to give up. You didn't want to actually try winning. And I remember doing a few Type 1 tournaments. I ended up winning the tournament because I looked at the Stasis player and said, let's play this out. Because the funny thing about the stasis deck is, yeah, you're winning that way, but the thing is, your deck can be your very own prison. Because I ended up playing the person, they got the combo, they stasised out, and I couldn't do anything. I'm like, yeah, let's play it out. And then after about 3 or 4 turns, like, yeah, you win. Because they
have you stasis bot. I can't draw my win con. This is
because they didn't want to play out their very own condition that they set up.
Back when Extended was the popular PTQ format, my favorite deck in that format was Squandered Stasis. 5 colors, and I had Equipoise and Stasis, and I had to explain to every person that I cast Equipoise against what it did, and I absolutely loved that deck, and I finished many a tournament with a record of 1, 1, and 4. Because I was not fast enough at it.
Well, thank you for the vintage story, and I think we're prepared to close the show.
Let's do it.
Again, thanks, Kevin, for joining us. It was really a pleasure to have you on, and it was an interesting topic to talk about these cards and these formats and do a little comparison between them. Do you have any shout-outs or contact information you want to give out?
I would simply add thank you as well for having me. This has been fascinating. I like comparing formats. I like the comparisons between Vintage and Pauper. I think we have a lot of interesting things in common, so I appreciate the opportunity. And for anyone who's not already familiar, our show is So Many Insane Plays. We're on MTG Cast. We're on Eternal Central. We get posted there. And we're on Twitter at Many Insane Plays. So, yeah, give us a try.
Yeah. And you people, if you need to reach me, you can find me from Popular People forums or from Twitter. They're at @ULR_MP. Dan, Peter, Nate. Nate, feel free to close the show and give all the usual stuff.
Okay, you can find me at nyukon on MTGO or at Nathan Yunkin on Twitter. Or especially in the next week, because I'm going to be posting a lot of stuff that I see at con. And that's about it. Just want to thank Matti for taking up main hosting this week, because it's really awesome not having to come up with enough for show notes every week.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. It's a long show this week. I'm sorry for the listeners.
No big deal.
It's not that long.
Don't
worry
no,
about it.
That long. About the same amount of time we usually go. So
I take responsibility for that.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
I also like long shows, but some people like that their shows last only about an hour. I don't know which is the correct way to do it.
Don't worry.
Like 5 hours.
Our show was long this time because we had content, not because we were just bullshitting and insulting Nate the entire time.
Yeah.
But hey, I think that covers it. Thank you everyone for joining the show, and I guess we'll see you next week. Or probably not me, but the rest of the guys.
Yeah, you should come back more often.
Yeah, I know I should, but it's hard. It's 5 a.m. here when you guys start, or 6 a.m. But anyways.
Yeah, jeez.
It was 5 a.m. here.
Yeah.
You guys are troopers. I'm just going to go ahead and say that now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But
Combining work, family, stuff like that, it's hard. Actually, my wife is behind the door waiting me to shut this down so he can go.
Okay, until next week, I'm Nate.
I'm Peter.
My name is Matti.
Dan.
And we're done.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
And Kevin.
Please.
And it's Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
This is Pauper to the People. There you go. Got it. I'm so glad we got someone else doing that now.
Our resident Viking does such a good job at it, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, you were good. And
Thank
Kevin, you were good.
Oh, thanks. This is great. You guys are fun. I like this show.
Well, we do content and stuff like that, but we're kind of casual, if you didn't notice. It's just kind of...
Well, I don't know. I would say that that's another thing that Pauper and Vintage share is you are forced to run the community on your own. They're very community-driven formats.
Yeah.
You guys were fortunate enough to get sanctioned on Magic Online before us, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still, we're on the outskirts of Magic's organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely respect you guys running this show and the work you do. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Work? We just yap our lips a lot and have words come out.
Don't sell yourself short. There's a lot of expertise flowing.
I dread, ever since I've taken over management, I dread listening to every show because I hate hearing I'll listen to the last recording like, God, I sound like an idiot. Why did I say that?
Because if you thought the sentence out rather than going da 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 da, you might not sound like an idiot.
But even when I think it through, I still think I sound like an idiot.
Notice how he said might.
But then again, when I talk to other people, I was like, oh, you do just fine. Don't worry about it.
It's called consoling you, Nate.
So whatever. So no one's complaining.
Chris Weaver doesn't know that we have stopped now, so all this will be on the recording.
This is what we call the bloopers. This is the best part of the show.
Yeah, Chris takes care of this, but I think I'm gonna get going because I actually got to get to work. So
party pooper. Anyways, it's been a pleasure talking with you guys. You take it easy.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
See you all. I gotta go also. Special thanks for Kevin too showing up.
Yeah, thanks again. It was fun. Talk to you
We'll
later.
have you again sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to.